and welcome to Bizarre Tales. On today's video I'm going to be bringing you a reincarnation story that I have taken from a segment from one of my podcast episodes. If you want to listen to the rest of the episode, you can find the podcast on all good podcast apps. Just search for Bizarre Podcast and look for this logo and subscribe. And with that being said, enjoy the video. For a long time now, many people who believe in reincarnation have come forward claiming that they have been reborn and that they remember their past life. But unfortunately, most of these claims just don't add up when the story is researched. For instance, someone who claims to have been reborn may give information on who they were in a past life, where they lived and who they lived with, and more info along those lines that should prove that their story is real. But unfortunately, as I said, mostly these stories don't come to anything. The information given just doesn't add up, and in the end, it ends up proving absolutely nothing. So is that it? Is that conclusive evidence that reincarnation does not exist? I don't think so. I think we need to delve a little bit deeper. And on today's episode of Bizarre Podcast, we'll be doing just that. The word reincarnation, roughly translated from Latin, means entering the body again. Reincarnation is a belief that the soul or energy that resides in the body can move into a new body after the death of the old body. Also known as rebirth or transmigration, the idea of reincarnation dates way back to the days of Plato and Socrates, so it's safe to say the idea has been around for quite some time. Let me tell you a supposed true story regarding reincarnation that I consider to be one of the most compelling. Every now and again, you get a story that is pure gold, and this one is it. This is a story of James Leininger. James Leininger was born on April the 10th, 1998 in San Francisco. His mother Andrea Leininger and father Bruce Leininger noticed early on that their son had begun to say some strange things. When James was 22 months old, his mother and father took him to see the aeroplanes at the Flight Museum. All little boys seem to love aeroplanes, but James was taking particular interest in the World War II planes. It was clear to see to his mother and father that he had a fascination with these World War II planes, and he was 100% in his element. So of course, when it came time to leave, James fought and cried. He simply didn't want to leave the aeroplanes behind. He loved the planes so much. One way to persuade him was to take him to the gift shop on the way out. All kids love the gift shop. Now, as you can imagine, this gift shop would have been absolutely packed full of all sorts of different toy aeroplanes and flying vehicles. There would have probably been mugs, hats, t-shirts, all sorts of different kinds of merchandise, sweets. In short, a child's paradise. But out of all the toy aeroplanes in the gift shop, one particular one caught James's eye, and his mother and father purchased it for him. Later, his mother noticed a bomb hanging from the bottom of the toy plane, so she pointed it out to her 22-month-old son. Remember this part, 22-month-old. She said, "Look, James, it's a bomb." James instantly responded, "That's not a bomb, Mummy, it's a drop tank." His mother had no idea what a drop tank was, so she asked her husband. So after a bit of research, James's father discovered that a drop tank was an extra fuel tank that planes from that era carried with them for long journeys. And I'm sure you will agree this is information that a 22-month-old shouldn't and wouldn't normally know about. Now fast forward a little bit, not too far, because it wasn't long after this that James started having horrendous nightmares in the middle of the night. His parents rushed to his room to find him thrashing around in his covers. They would find James on his back with his arms and legs in the air as if he was trying to push something off the top of him. And then the little boy started to scream, "Plane on fire, plane crash, little man cannot get out." When James woke up, he told his mother and father that he was the little man in the plane, and the little man in the plane was also called James. But this wasn't the only information gathered from this dream. What I'm about to tell you now is absolutely amazing. He also added that his plane was called a Corsair, and that he had been shot down by the Japanese near Iwo Jima. He also told his parents his plane had taken off from a boat Amazingly, he had a name for this boat, the Natoma. And as if that wasn't enough, he also mentioned another man's name, a friend who was in the dream. And this man was called Jack Larson. Now, as more time passed, his parents noticed that when he played with his planes, the scenarios were always World War II based. This was also the same in his artwork. He drew American and Japanese planes in mid-air dogfights. Always World War II scenes and World War II planes. He also knew the names of the planes he drew. Now, as I said, James would draw aeroplanes in his artwork, but only aeroplanes from the World War II era. When he'd finished his artwork, he would sign it. But he would sign it James 3. Curiosity got the better of his mother and father, and they asked him why he wrote down the number 3 on his pictures. And he simply said, "That's because I am the third James." So at this point, his mother and father started to realise that there could be something to all this. And in an attempt to actually prove this wasn't reincarnation, James's father started his research. He would be shocked by what he found. James's father discovered that the USS Natoma was a real-life aircraft carrier that served in the Pacific in World War II, and amazingly it had been stationed at Iwo Jima. And what was even more amazing was the fact that a pilot named Jack Larson was actually based on the same aircraft carriers. The exact same name James had given his parents from his nightmares. But wait, it only gets more bizarre. One day when James was only 2.5 years old, he would give his father some information that would give more evidence that maybe James had indeed been reborn. On this particular day, James's father was flicking through a book on the war of Iwo Jima when James started to point at a picture in the book. This picture was of an aerial shot of an aircraft base near where a dormant volcano was situated. James had told his father that this was the area that his airplane had crashed. You see, it would seem that James was recognising certain pictures in this book that he remembered from his dreams. So, naturally, James's father wasted no time and started to track down a veteran who was situated at the same base as Jack Larson, the pilot James had mentioned before. The veteran told James's father that Jack Larson left the base one day in an aircraft and never returned. No one knew what had happened to him. Later, James's father would attend a reunion for the veterans. It was here that he discovered that Jack Larson had actually survived the war, but he wasn't at the reunion, so James's father went on to track down Jack Larson once and for all. And when James's father eventually did track down Jack Larson, of course he paid him a visit. James's father also learned that only one pilot was actually lost from the ship during the Battle of Iwo Jima, and that pilot's name was James M. Houston Jr. Now, if you remember, young James signed his drawings James number 3. Well, James M. Houston Jr. would have been James II, meaning young James may have thought of himself as James III. James's father had gathered some very compelling evidence. After more digging, he discovered the final bit of information that would convince him that his son had a past life. James N. Houston Jr.'s plane was one of 8 that had gone out on an airstrike operation. Including himself, there was 8 pilots who went out that day, and one of the pilots was Jack Larson. James M. Houston Jr.'s plane was the only plane to be shot down that day, and to James's father's amazement, the plane was shot down in the exact place that young James had pointed out in the book near the volcano. It would seem young James was indeed experiencing memories from a past life, and his mother and father were convinced of this. They eventually tracked down James M. Houston Jr.'s sister, who would have been around 84 years old at the time, to ask her a series of questions about her dead brother. James's mother and father gave information about the deceased pilot to his sister that James had told them, and the 84-year-old sister confirmed the information. Eventually, as James grew up into adult life, his past life memories seemed to fade and the nightmares stopped. Although now, a fully grown man, James still feels a strange connection to the man he once was.